Net gain, networking, encouragement, and training. Brought to you by Jack of All People Trades, helping snow and landscape companies recruit, train, and retain the best employees. All right, welcome to Net Gain. This is Networking, Encouragement, Training. I'm your host, Evan Tachoir from Jack of All People Trades. We exist to help snow, landscape, and service companies find, retain, and train the best people without all the corporate HR fluff. We want you to help stop losing good people and keep good people. So here I have a special guest with me today, Mike Voories from Business Resource One. We are going to be talking about recruiting best practices in the snow and landscape industry. So I always like to start Net Gain with an encouragement before we get to the discussion. And my encouragement is, with how you see yourself and how you see your people, see yourself and your people with infinite value. And what I mean by that is there's always potential to grow. So don't feel like you're limited or can't get better in a certain area. Unlike machines, which are designed a certain way and there's only a max capacity, people can grow infinitely. So that time you spend in people, including spending on yourself, whether it's your health, your professional development, can really grow you infinitely. So I want to encourage you with that if you're in a struggling season, you have potential to grow beyond it or find that better role that might fit you. If you're in a thriving season, you have a chance to even thrive more. And same with your team if you're a leader that develops teams. So with that encouragement out of the way, we are going to introduce Mike. So Mike, if you want to introduce yourself and your business, go ahead.
Thanks, Evan. My name is Mike Voories. I am the founder of Business Resources One. So our friends just call us BR1. It's a little bit shorter. So we do recruiting and we help companies build stronger teams, primarily for landscaping, snow, service companies, that sort of thing. Before I started BR1, probably been about 4 years now. Before that, I served 25 years or more in the landscape and green industry. So that's where the focus comes from. So lawn maintenance, landscaping, snow and ice management. We know that stuff really well, and now we've taken the position and the responsibility of helping the industry build stronger teams. So that's kind of the high-level view of what we do.
Really cool, really cool. So just to kind of pivot off that a little bit, for those who might not be familiar, whether it's, kind of a smaller shop or hasn't recruited much, kind of for those who aren't familiar with a recruiting firm like BR1 and recruiting and training consulting, because I know you do a bunch, kind of give them an overview of what you do with the business and what the value to them as a snow landscape company is.
Yeah, so a big part of what we do is recruiting. What we've found is that a lot of companies, yes, they struggle with recruiting, but they also struggle with retaining talent. Or maybe they hire somebody and the recruiting goes well, but they struggle with performance, right? So it's kind of got to be a more holistic approach. So that's kind of how we function. So recruiting is still a huge piece of what we do. We also want to help companies build stronger teams. So retention and performance, company culture, that kind of whole puzzle. What we do, I guess, is a little bit different than a lot of recruiters. I don't know if this is a good time, Evan, to kind of...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what happens in the recruiting industry a lot of times is recruiters will charge companies 20 to 30% of the person that they find's first year salary. So if you hire a recruiter to find a $50,000 account manager or a $20 an hour crew leader, it really doesn't matter. You end up paying them 20 to 30% of that person's first year salary. We operate differently. So everything we do is flat fee. So we charge per hire or we charge per month for our subscription recruiting. So it's a little bit different in that respect. And then the fact that our focus is on the green industry and snow and ice management and service industries, that's kind of a differentiator as well.
Yeah. So with that, I was going to ask you as well, since you were, a business owner, leader in the green and snow industry, how do you feel that set you apart from other recruiting firms, being that you've worked that boots on the ground?
Yeah, I think it helps us talk the talk a little bit, So, traditional recruiters are going to struggle, I would think, with finding irrigation techs, where we're kind of, that's just an example, but we're kind of in a position where we can interview an irrigation technician on the phone, and we know the words to listen to, we know the phrases to listen to, we know what a two-layer system is, we know what winterizations are, and not that we need to be, I guess, a trade expert in every single thing that we recruit for, because we're not, but it does give us an advantage for our clients being able to understand their business, understand the labor market, and then ultimately understand what the people who are being recruited are going to do after they're hired, so that we can kind of advise our clients if, is this person likely to be successful or not.
Yeah, 100%. I think that same thing. So for, those who are listening that aren't familiar with my background either, I was a recruiter, talent manager, project management in primarily snow and ice, a little bit of landscape, but I do know as a recruiter too, I agree with you that firsthand experience in the industry gives you an advantage as if I was just recruiting. Because when I came into the industry, I didn't know what brine was versus different material. I didn't know what different types of equipment are, what the demands are, what the call out process looks like for a snowstorm. So it does give you a big advantage. Just kind of to jump to the next question. So if companies are thinking about working with a firm like yours, I know most probably think about it from recruiting because that seems to be the most on fire, but what are some things companies should think about when engaging with a firm like yours?
Yeah, so if somebody's considering using a recruiter, I guess first and foremost, my advice would be to figure out very specifically what you're hoping to accomplish. And I don't know that a lot of recruiters do this, maybe they do, but that's something we can help with. So like on our sales call, our discovery call, we can kind of go through this kind of stuff. But either way, before you start reaching out to recruiters, I would figure out exactly what you're trying to accomplish. So that's what's going to set you up for success, regardless of who you use, whether it's BR1 or some other company, or if you end up ultimately doing the recruiting internally. What I mean by that is a lot of times we'll have people reach out and they'll say, I'm looking for a zone manager for a snow plowing company. I want someone to run an area, like an area manager. A lot of times they haven't put a ton of thought or a ton of detail into what does that job really entail? Or maybe they have figured that out, but they haven't figured out what does an ideal candidate look like, right? A job description is usually not enough. You usually can get some applications, get some resumes with a job description posted. But what we encourage people to do is figure out the job. And a job title is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about very specifically, what does that job do? What's the day in the life of XYZ. And then step 2 is figure out that ideal candidate profile. If you could find the perfect person to do this job, what does he or she look like, right? And you write all that down. Because launching a search, whether you're using a company like ours or you're doing it internally, it's really premature to launch that search before you have those answers, because you can't build good interview guides and ask good questions if you don't know the job and you don't know the ideal candidate, right? So if I'm interviewing you and I need an area manager for a snow company, but I don't know what success looks like, how am I possibly going to ask the right questions? So then we get ourselves into a position where we're making gut decisions, or we're going off instinct, or we're just, we're using experience on a resume, where we really need to be kind of fine-tuned on that specific search. So that's, I guess, long way of answering your question. If someone's considering reaching out to a recruiter, do your homework on the front end and know what you're hoping to accomplish. Who am I trying to find? What does success look like? How soon do I need to fill the position? How much am I paying? What benefits do I have to offer? So that when you talk to a recruiter, you can have a good conversation. And then hopefully, whether that's us or someone else, they can shoot you straight and say, yeah, I can find you someone, or no, I can't, or it's going to take 45 days, or it's going to take 6 months, or whatever. I know a lot of recruiters, they start with not enough information, and then the client ends up underwhelmed because they're getting the wrong candidates, or the search is going too slow. When we talk to someone in that position, we do our best to try to, not just get their business, but ultimately try to help them with that process.
Oh, my guest co-host just joined me here. So my dog.
Who is that little guy?
So this is Case. So this is my dog here.
Oh, yes, I heard about Case. I don't think I ever saw him.
Have I told you how Case got his name?
I think you did.
Okay, yeah.
At least the bullet points.
Yeah. So he was named after the snow company because basically my old ownership was like, well, why is Case always ahead of us in the ASCA rankings? Like, what would Case do? And I jokingly said, if I got a dog, I'd name him Case. So, I'm a little bit of a troll at heart. So I kind of carried the joke forward. And now that I'm consulting in the industry, it's like, maybe you should tell me what to do too. So, but to not dovetail off that, back to your point. So, I'd asked about, what should companies think about when engaging a recruiting firm? And the one thing I really hear as a trainer, I always try to get to the takeaways. And the big takeaway I heard was, and correct me if I'm wrong, preparation is really key. and you went down a couple good areas of preparation, is number one, map out what that role is going to be doing. I think practically from a recruiting side, the day to day, what are they doing day to day? But then also think about what goals are they accomplishing? Obviously that'll look a little different. If it's a crew member, they're supporting with their work the goals of the projects and the landscape maintenance of the snow that you're doing, versus if it's, say, an account manager, you might say your goal is we really want to infiltrate the healthcare market and, really get healthcare for both snow and landscape. And this person, that's going to be a long-term goal of theirs, because like you said, that's going to affect how you train that person, how you onboard, who you're looking for, even thinking about the prospective clients that they're talking to. So I think preparation in the mapping out, and then preparation in the ideal candidate as well. What do they look like? So if it's somebody like in sales, for example, that's going to have to be closing, do they have that grit to close? Do they have that follow-up? Do they have the understanding another's perspective of being able to ask good questions? Have they shown documented success of following a sales process to completion, to both get leads and then ultimately, finish? So I'll kind of go there, because with what I do with training, I'm very big on strength-based development, Clifton Strength, DISC, different tools there, but really about figuring out what people's strengths are and putting them in the right role. So how have you kind of done that from the recruiting perspective, and how have you encouraged companies to think about the right strengths and paint that ideal candidate profile if they're not thinking about it?
I think the first thing is to figure out kind of your non-negotiables. It's always easy for me to say, because I don't have to do the work or make the payroll for that company. It's easy for me to say, like, experience doesn't matter, or you need to pay top dollar to get the best people. Like, that's easy for me to say. But in the real world, it's still relevant, because you got to figure out your non-negotiables. So, like, if you're hiring for a snow company, are you in a position to do any training, any development, any coaching, mentoring early on in that employee relationship or not? And, you've got to be honest with yourself. We all know the right answer to say is, yes, we're going to do training. We're going to do fantastic onboarding. We're going to be there to help this person succeed. But at the end of the day, a lot of companies, especially with higher level roles, they really need somebody to hit the ground running. If that's your situation, you got to be honest about that. So that kind of carries into the recruiting process. One of the questions we like to ask companies when they come to us is, what are you willing to do to help this person succeed? And sometimes they've thought about it and they have an answer, but a lot of times they don't. And it's a good question, thought-provoking if nothing else, because that really pulls out of the hiring manager, I'm really, really busy. I really need somebody that can kind of get in here and hit the ground running. Okay, well, as a recruiter, that's good to know. Or if you're doing your own recruiting internally, that's good to know. With that said, I would encourage people to understand that, in the real world, for people to be successful, regardless of how much skill and experience they have, very few of us can succeed in a new company without some support. Doctors still go to training. Accountants and CPAs have ongoing continued education. In the snow industry, I'm still a CSP from when I was hands-on in the snow. There's continuing education you got to do to keep your certification alive. So I don't know, probably got off track a little bit there, but first step is figure out what skills you have to have. Right? Yeah. So do they have to have experience with XYZ? That's just stuff they absolutely have to bring to the table. Identify that. And then what skills would be nice, but maybe you could train if you had to. And then what skills are you going to train? You have to train because you don't do it like other companies. Maybe you use some unique software, or you plow snow in a certain way, or you expect customer relations to be handled in a certain way. Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done, but it's really just identifying what skills you have to have, what skills you'd like to have, and then what skills you're willing to kind of train and develop.
100%. So no, I think you went a lot of good ways on that. I almost say, if I could map this episode out in my head, how I see it is every point that we start with, you almost go down 2 or 3 really good routes here, because I'm listening for takeaways and I'm hearing a couple good ones for each. So I think that's really great. A couple I heard there is, number one, your non-negotiables. So know absolutely what you have to have. And then I think a takeaway I would share that you kind of shared, but I would challenge any company leaders or owners listening to this when it comes to recruiting is, you have to be realistic. And you can tell me your perspective on this. I know I'm going to be a little black or white, but I want you to just react to this. I feel like you have to be realistic to say, if you want somebody to hit the ground running, be that experienced person that's going to be producing close to immediately making an impact, you've got to be willing to pay that top dollar for them and also have that environment of flexibility, career growth opportunities, engagement. You have to have that good employee value proposition for that. Or if you're willing to train, you can then maybe take somebody who's not that top dollar. I believe you still have to have the good employee value proposition regardless, because employees are looking for that. But you can be a little more flexible on salary and experience if you're willing to train. If you say, hey, we have a good 30, 60, 90-day plan set up that we feel like we can take somebody with the right attitude and the right fit with our culture and values and put them in here, then maybe you can settle a little bit more on salary, versus if you need to hit the ground running, you kind of can't have the filet mignon mindset with the, Steakums budget. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. If you want someone that can hit the ground running, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about a crew leader, salesperson, a manager, or even an office person, it really doesn't matter. You either got to pay for it or you got to teach it. It's very difficult, I should say, to be in the middle or the bottom of the pay scale and expect somebody to come in on day one and perform at a very high level. Now, with that said, if you're going to bring someone in and expect them to hit the ground running, maybe you have the budget to pay top dollar to get that person. That's half of it. You also have to be willing to get out of their way. And some business owners and hiring managers struggle with that as well, because the type of person who's going to jump ship for top dollar and maybe a big opportunity, paying them is step one, but they're also going to want a certain amount of freedom and control of their day and control of their destiny and that sort of thing. So I guess another way to look at it is like if you bring in a heavy-hitting salesperson with a fantastic track record and you pay them top dollar and build a commission structure where they can make really good money, and then you expect them to hit the ground running, but you also want them to change how they do things and kind of come around to your way of doing it, that sometimes could backfire in managers' faces as well. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No.
So sometimes the right answer, even if you do have the budget, is not always that super experienced person. If you're, like in our company, for example, we're, a small recruiting company, but we still have a very, very candidate-centric, client-centric way of doing things. So like when we hire new recruiters, we will interview experienced recruiters, but it's very rare for someone to have like years and years and years of experience recruiting and be the person who we hire on our team to do recruiting. We don't do healthcare recruiting. We don't do high volume recruiting. We don't do speed recruiting, like staffing, like trying to find people in a week. It's just not what we do. So those people, a lot of times, even though they have a ton of experience and their resume looks good, they don't fit what we do. They just don't mesh with us or our clients or our candidates. And in landscaping and snow, it's the same way, if that makes sense. At least that's my perspective on it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate your perspective on that. And that kind of ties with, I've done one episode on employee engagement, kind of the basics of it, employees needing to know what's expected and have the materials, information to do the job. So I'd encourage actually those listening to this to go check that out. And I'll be dropping some other episodes coming off of that really talk about that, because really how I try to talk about that is not just engagement from an academic side, but things you can do practically as a snow landscape service business to make sure that you have an engaging environment for people to come into. Because the worst thing, kind of like Mike said, is for you to throw top dollar at somebody and top commission structure, and then you don't have the infrastructure to support them. And I would also challenge that the infrastructure is not necessarily, I think a lot of people think I have to have all the bells and whistles of a corporate, but truthfully, there's a lot of people out there that they want security of a place that they can build a career and not worry about a mass layoff of like a tech company or, a big Fortune 500 or whatever. There are people that want a smaller environment where they can have a little bit of say and input into how things are done, as opposed to just being handed a manual that says, okay, here's the job, here's everything. So there are ways to sell. And just like with sales, like you have an ideal client and that, I'll use East Coast Facilities for an example, as a big snow contractor. They know that their ideal client is the big distribution healthcare center, like things that need
a lot of big iron on them. They're not necessarily going for the mom and pop dentist office down Main Street. Same thing with employees, I think applies, is not every employee is going to be that fit for you, and that's okay. There's some that are going to be looking for that big corporate. There's some that are going to be looking for everything laid out exactly with procedure manuals, and they might not be for you, and that's okay. A fit is a two-way street. So with that, I'm going to transition to my last question here, Mike, is, we're getting into, it's January 26th now that we're meeting, probably have this out in February, but what kind of challenges are you seeing on the, hiring with snow, landscape, and related industries? And, what's the landscape kind of looking like? What could you kind of give a heads up to businesses?
Yeah, so as soon as January 1st came, we've, in our company with recruiting and helping companies with building their teams, we've gotten incredibly busy, like even busier than the last few years. And part of that is we're trying to grow our business and we're marketing and all that kind of stuff. But the other part of it is we have a lot more people reaching out to us who we haven't talked to in the past, who have found us organically or through marketing and whatever. They're wanting to get an early start on what they call like spring recruiting. And talking to a lot of these folks and talking to our existing clients, and then also just kind of seeing what's happening in the industry, what I would say is it's a very competitive market. It's every bit as competitive, if not more competitive than it was last year. So it's definitely not moving backward. It's either similar or more competitive. The best job seekers, whether it's a crew leader, an irrigation tech, a sales guy, a manager, it doesn't matter. The best candidates have a lot of choices. They just do. Those companies that recognize that and do their best to compete are going to have an advantage. Right. So what I tell people is you have to be real. Like, don't promise something you can't do. Don't stretch yourself beyond what you can actually provide. There are people out there that want what you have, but you have to compete. Like 10 years ago, where some employers got away with treating candidates and treating employees like they were doing them a favor, it just doesn't fly anymore. The best candidates have a lot of choices. So they want a competitive compensation and benefits package. And that's not everything. They're not always looking for the best offer when it comes to dollars. But when they go to an interview, they're looking for, how does this company organize? Does my hiring manager show up on time for the interview? Is he or she well prepared? Are they going to help me succeed, or are they just going to throw me to the wolves? What is the culture like? And here's the other thing, Evan, is it's a very small world with the internet now, and social media and IA and AI and all these other things that are going on. Back when I used to walk into job interviews when I was younger and whatever, you would learn about the company when you got there. Like, hey, Evan, thanks for talking to me. Tell me about the company. That's not the case anymore. People know, like they know everything. They Google your company. They read the reviews. They see what other jobs you're posting out there. They talk to other people in the industry. So kind of how consumers are more educated than they've ever been before when they buy cars and TVs and stuff like that. Job seekers and candidates are more educated than they've ever been before. So reputation is huge. You got to put on a good show, but it's got to be real, right? So like if one of your benefits is come plow snow for us because we have the latest and greatest technology and the trucks and all our stuff is nice and new and clean, then use that to your advantage. Like sell that and find people that value that. If top dollar comp is what you have going for you, then use that to sell your company. If you're a growing organization and there's a ton of opportunities because of that growth, like, hey, come in here as a crew leader. I could help you get to be an ops manager in a couple of years. We get a lot of candidates that's what they're looking for, is forward momentum, some kind of growth. They get stuck and they want to leave. But you had mentioned something earlier, Evan, about like it doesn't have to be this perfect corporate thing. It definitely doesn't have to be perfect. And I can tell you, in over 25 years of interviewing and hiring people, I've never had anyone say, I'm looking for something more corporate and more rigid. Right. So like, that's just not what people want. If anything, we steal people away from corporate rigid companies. So you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to put on a perfect show. Everything doesn't have to be black and white, nice straight lines, all of that. But you do have to appeal to job seekers and candidates, because it is crazy competitive out there, and it is a job seekers market. And the companies that rise to that challenge are going to succeed, and the companies that don't are going to continue to struggle, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I definitely heard there that, the employee value proposition, I'll kind of in closing even pitch your podcast. So BR1 does have their own podcast. So both with NetGain and BR1, if you really want two podcasts, I know I'm kind of pitching myself here, but I am pitching Mike's, that really hit on the employee experience, interviewing, how to find, retain, and keep the best people, I definitely suggest getting both in your podcast subscriptions because they will tell you that. And, Mike, you did a great episode on the employee value proposition where you talked about all that. So I definitely encourage people to listen to that. And long story short, what I heard as a takeaway is it's an employee's market. So make sure you have something worthwhile that you're offering and really go back and audit that. And I always say with training, continual improvement. You don't have to revamp everything today, but think of what's one thing we could do. Maybe we don't have an onboarding checklist and we could do that. Maybe we could just say, hey, let's develop a 30-day training plan. Let's make that our focus. Or let's partner somebody with a mentor or a buddy when they come on board as somebody to go to. Little things like that can make a big difference. So just in wrapping up, this has been NetGain Live podcast. So I've been with Mike Voories of Business Resources One, BR1. You can definitely hit them up online, check out their podcast. So if you have any kind of recruiting or employee needs within the snow, landscape, and service industry base, hit them up. And also, if you have anything as far as needs for training and coaching within this area, hit me up as well, Jack of all people trades. This has been NetGain. We help you find, train, and retain the best people for your snow, service, and landscape business. And we're out.
With no weather, but you ain't gonna slip and fall with that. Why? Cause we snow fighters, we assaulting that. Get it, salting that. King need the salting rap.